Hey there, fellow thrill seekers, and welcome back to my channel. Tonight, we're taking a journey into the dark side of rail travel with 4 bone-chilling accounts of train terror. These stories come from real people who've experienced things that will make you think twice before your next train ride. So, grab your ticket, find your seat, and hold on tight as we go off the rails with these 4 terrifying tales. Remember, these stories aren't for the faint of heart, so viewer discretion is advised. Let's begin our journey into the unknown.
I've been a train conductor for 15 years, traversing the sprawling network of railways that crisscross our nation. In my time, I've witnessed my fair share of peculiar occurrences: drunken passengers causing a ruckus, unexpected wildlife on the tracks, and even the occasional onboard birth. But nothing in my decade and a half of experience could have prepared me for what transpired on that frigid winter night during the midnight run from Chicago to New Orleans. The evening of January 15th started like any other. I arrived at Chicago's Union Station, my breath visible in the biting cold as I made my way to the platform. The weather forecast had predicted heavy snowfall, and the ominous dark clouds looming overhead seemed to confirm nature's intentions. As I boarded the train and began my pre-departure checks, I couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would be different somehow. We departed Chicago behind schedule, the relentless snowstorm already causing delays across the network. As we chugged south, the world outside became a swirling vortex of white, obscuring everything beyond the train's windows. The rhythmic clacking of wheels against tracks was muffled by the howling wind, creating an eerie atmosphere that set my nerves on edge. Hours passed, and we fell further behind schedule. Passengers dozed fitfully in their seats, lulled by the gentle rocking of the train and the late hour. As we approached the final leg of our journey, I began my last round of checks, moving from car to car with practiced efficiency. It was in the last car that I first saw her. Sitting alone, a solitary figure against the inky blackness beyond the window, was a woman in a striking red coat. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, contrasting sharply with the vibrant hue of her attire. Something about her stillness, the way she seemed utterly unaffected by the train's movement, caught my attention. I approached her, my footsteps echoing in the near-empty car. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quietude. "May I see your ticket?" She turned to face me, and in that moment, I felt as though I'd been plunged into an icy lake. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with a shimmer that seemed to come from within. But it was her eyes that truly chilled me to my core. Where there should have been whites and irises, there was only an impenetrable darkness, 2 black voids that seemed to draw me in. A smile spread across her face, revealing teeth that were far too sharp, too numerous to be human. "I don't have a ticket," she said, her voice reverberating strangely, as though coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I never do." I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. In that fraction of a second, she vanished. One moment she was there, the next gone, leaving behind nothing but a lingering chill and the faint scent of ozone. Panic gripped me as I searched the entire train, car by car, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no sign of the woman in the red coat. It was as if she had never existed. When we finally arrived in New Orleans, hours behind schedule, I immediately checked the passenger manifest. My hands shook as I scanned the list of names, searching for any clue that might explain what I had seen. But there was no record of a woman in a red coat boarding in Chicago or at any stop along the way. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps I had dozed off momentarily, my exhausted mind conjuring up a vivid hallucination. Or maybe the strain of the difficult journey had caused me to misinterpret a perfectly ordinary encounter. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. A week after that fateful night, I overheard a conversation that sent shivers down my spine. 2 fellow conductors, grizzled veterans of the rails, were huddled in a corner of the break room, their voices low and serious. "Did you hear about Jim?" one of them asked. "Says he saw her again last night." "The woman in the red coat?" the other replied, his face pale. "That's the 3rd sighting this month." As I listened, They spoke of a spectral figure that had been appearing on trains across the country. Always a woman in a red coat, always materializing in the dead of night, and always vanishing without a trace. Some said she was the ghost of a passenger who had died in a horrific train crash decades ago, her spirit forever bound to the railways, searching endlessly for her final destination. The story spread like wildfire among the railway staff. Each retelling added new details, new encounters. Some claimed to have spoken to her, others swore they had seen her walk through solid walls. A few even insisted that trains she appeared on were doomed to crash, though I never found any evidence to support this chilling claim. As the weeks turned to months, I found myself unable to shake the memory of that night. Every time I walked through a train car after midnight, I would hold my breath, half expecting to see her sitting there, staring out into the darkness with those pitch-black eyes. The rational part of my mind insisted that there had to be a logical explanation, but the chill that ran down my spine every time I recalled her smile told a different story. I began to notice changes in my behavior. I became more vigilant during night runs, my eyes constantly scanning the cars for any sign of red. I started avoiding the last car when possible, delegating those checks to other staff members. My colleagues noticed my unease, and soon, whispers began to circulate that I had seen her. As my reputation grew, younger conductors would seek me out, hungry for details of my encounter. I found myself reluctant to speak about it, partly out of fear of being labeled crazy, but mostly because revisiting that memory brought back the terror of that moment with vivid clarity. Yet, as time passed, I began to wonder if there was a purpose to my experience. Perhaps I had been chosen as a witness, tasked with warning others about the phantom passenger. And so, I began to share my story, first with close colleagues, then with wider circles within the railway community. My tale became a sort of cautionary legend among train staff. If you ever find yourself on a late-night train, I would tell them, and you see a woman in a red coat, heed my advice. Don't look into her eyes. And whatever you do, don't ask for her ticket. Some passengers are better left undisturbed. Years have passed since that winter night, and I've never seen the woman in the red coat again. But her impact on my life has been indelible. I've become known as the conductor who saw the phantom passenger, a title that brings both respect and wariness from my peers. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, when the moon is hidden and the world seems to hold its breath, I find myself peering into the shadows of the train cars, half hoping, half fearing to catch a glimpse of red. And in those moments, I'm reminded that there are things in this world that defy explanation, mysteries that lurk in the spaces between what we know and what we fear to discover. So if you ever find yourself on a midnight train, and you see a solitary figure in a red coat staring out the window, remember my story. Some tickets are better left unchecked, and some passengers are not meant to reach their final destination.
As a software engineer, my life follows a predictable routine. Wake up, grab coffee, catch the 7:15 a.m. train, and spend the commute buried in my laptop, getting a head start on the day's coding challenges. It's a rhythm I've maintained for years, finding comfort in its predictability. But on one seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning, that rhythm was shattered in a way I'm still struggling to comprehend. The day began like any other. I arrived at the station, travel mug in hand, and boarded my usual train. Finding my preferred seat, third car, right side, facing forward, I settled in, opened my laptop, and prepared to dive into a particularly tricky bit of code I'd been grappling with the previous evening. As the train pulled out of the station, I reached for the Wi-Fi, an automatic gesture born of habit. But something was off. The familiar connection wasn't there. Frowning, I refreshed the network list, but to no avail. Mildly annoyed but not overly concerned, I glanced up, intending to ask the passenger across from me if they were experiencing the same issue. That's when I realized something was very, very wrong. The interior of the train had transformed entirely. Gone were the sleek, modern seats with their built-in power outlets and the digital displays showing the next stop. Instead, I found myself surrounded by rich wood paneling, brass fixtures, and plush velvet seats. The lighting was softer, emanating from elegant glass sconces rather than the harsh fluorescence I was accustomed to. But it wasn't just the train that had changed. The passengers around me seemed to have stepped out of a different era altogether. Men in fedoras and neatly pressed suits, women with victory rolls in their hair and red lipstick, all engrossed in newspapers or engaged in hushed conversations. The fashion, the hairstyles, even the way they carried themselves, everything screamed 1940s. For a moment, I was convinced I was hallucinating. Perhaps I'd fallen asleep and was dreaming, or maybe I'd finally cracked under the pressure of looming deadlines. But everything felt far too real to be a dream. I could feel the scratch of wool from the vintage suit I was suddenly wearing, smell the acrid scent of cigarette smoke hanging in the air, since when was smoking allowed on trains, and hear the distinct clickety-clack of the wheels on the tracks, a sound somehow different, more pronounced than I was used to. Panic began to set in as the reality of my situation dawned on me. Somehow, impossibly, I had slipped back in time. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this some elaborate prank? A hidden camera show? Or had I genuinely, somehow, traveled more than 80 years into the past? Desperate for answers, I turned to the woman seated next to me, an elegant lady in her 50s wearing a pillbox hat and clutching a small leather handbag. "Excuse me," I stammered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Can you tell me what's going on? What year is this?" She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern, as if I was speaking a foreign language. Before she could respond, I instinctively reached for my smartphone, forgetting for a moment that such technology shouldn't exist in this time period. The woman's eyes widened in shock as I pulled out the sleek device. "Good heavens," she exclaimed, her accent sounding oddly formal and stilted to my modern ears. "What sort of device is that?" I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. How could I possibly describe a smartphone to someone from the 1940s? As I struggled to find an answer, the train began to slow, approaching a tunnel. The lights inside the carriage flickered, and I felt a strange sensation wash over me, as if reality itself was bending and warping around me. As we plunged into darkness, I closed my eyes, gripping the armrests of my seat tightly. There was a moment of vertigo, a feeling of being untethered from time and space. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. When I opened my eyes, everything had returned to normal. The modern seats were back, my fellow passengers were dressed in contemporary clothing, and my laptop sat on the table in front of me, screen dark and awaiting input. I looked down at myself, relieved to see my usual work attire rather than the vintage suit. For several minutes, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Had it all been a vivid daydream? Some kind of mass hallucination? But I could still feel the phantom itch of the wool suit, still smell the lingering scent of cigarette smoke. As the days passed, I tried to rationalize the experience. I researched time slips and temporal anomalies, delving into physics theories and paranormal accounts alike. I even considered the possibility that I was experiencing some kind of mental break, though the memory remained far too vivid and coherent for that explanation to stick. Despite my best efforts to move on, I found myself unable to let go of what had happened. Every day since, I've taken the same train, secretly hoping for another glimpse into the past. I've changed my routine, trying different seats, different times, anything that might trigger another slip. Sometimes, just as we're about to enter that fateful tunnel, I swear I can hear the faint strains of Glenn Miller or Benny Goodman playing in the distance, accompanied by the ghost of cigarette smoke. The experience has changed me in ways I'm still coming to terms with. I find myself more observant of my surroundings, more appreciative of the present moment. I've developed a newfound fascination with history, particularly the 1940s, poring over books and documentaries, searching for any detail that might corroborate what I saw during those brief minutes out of time. Part of me hopes to experience that time slip again, if only to prove to myself that I'm not crazy, that what I experienced was real. But a larger part of me is terrified of what might happen if I slip through time again and can't find my way back. What if next time, I'm trapped in the past, forced to live out my days in an era not my own? These questions haunt me, coloring every train journey with a mix of anticipation and dread. I've become hyper-aware of every tunnel, every flicker of the lights, every unexplained sound. My fellow regular commuters have noticed the change in me, though I've never shared the true reason for my altered behavior. How could I, without sounding completely insane. So I keep my secret, and I watch, and I wait. And to anyone reading this who might find themselves in a similar situation, I offer this advice. If you're ever on a train and suddenly find yourself surrounded by people and things that seem out of place, don't panic. You might just be taking an unscheduled trip through time. Pay attention to every detail, every sight and sound and smell. You may be witnessing a moment in history that few have ever seen. And remember, no matter how strange things get, no matter how far you might slip through the folds of time, the train always reaches its destination, eventually. Whether that destination is in your own time or another, well, that's the risk we time travelers must take. As for me, I'll keep riding the 715, laptop at the ready, eyes alert for any sign of wood paneling or brass fixtures. Because in the end, it's not about the destination, but the journey, even if that journey sometimes takes an unexpected detour through time.
For over 2 decades, I've worked as a maintenance technician in the London Underground. The sprawling network of tunnels and stations has been my second home, a labyrinth I thought I knew like the back of my hand. Every dark corner, every hidden passage, every echo of trains rumbling through ancient tunnels, I thought I'd seen it all. But 3 months ago, I discovered something that shattered my understanding of the world beneath London's streets and left me questioning everything I thought I knew. It was a cold Tuesday in November when my life changed forever. The day started routinely enough, a standard inspection of one of the older tunnels, long abandoned and closed off to the public. These forgotten passages always held a certain allure for me, silent witnesses to London's history, their walls etched with the passage of time. As I made my way through the dimly lit tunnel, my flashlight beam dancing across the curved walls, I carried out my usual checks. Structural integrity, signs of water damage, potential weak spots. It was a process I could practically do in my sleep. But then, something caught my eye. A small crack in the wall, barely visible in the gloom. In all my years working this section, I'd never noticed it before. Curiosity piqued. I moved closer, running my gloved hand over the rough surface. The crack was thin, but as I shone my flashlight directly into it, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat, a faint glimmer of light on the other side. Following protocol, I radioed my supervisor. "Jim, I found something odd in section 23B, possible breach in the tunnel wall. I'm going to investigate." His voice crackled back, tinged with mild concern. "All right, John, be careful, yeah? That section's old as dirt. Don't need the whole bloody tunnel coming down on your head." If only I'd known what I was about to discover, I would have heeded the nagging voice in the back of my mind that urged me to turn back, to forget about the crack and the mysterious light beyond. But curiosity has always been my weakness, and it drove me forward into the unknown. Using my tools, I carefully widened the crack, creating an opening just large enough for me to squeeze through. As I emerged on the other side, my jaw dropped in awe and disbelief. I found myself standing at the edge of a cavern so vast that my powerful flashlight couldn't illuminate its far reaches. The space stretched out before me, defying all logic and everything I thought I knew about London's underground geography. But it wasn't the size of the cavern that truly shocked me. It was what filled it. Trains, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching as far as the eye could see. They stood silent and motionless, like sleeping giants. Some I recognized from my years in the underground, old steam engines from the early days, familiar carriages from the 60s and 70s, even some of our current models. But others were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Sleek, futuristic designs that looked like they'd been plucked from a sci-fi movie. Trains made of materials I couldn't identify, with strange symbols etched into their sides. And others that seemed impossibly ancient, their structures so weathered and alien that they barely resembled trains at all. As I ventured deeper into this impossible train graveyard, my sense of wonder slowly gave way to a growing unease. Something wasn't right here. The air felt thick and static, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. And then I saw them, the skeletons. They were everywhere. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, scattered throughout the trains. Some still sat in seats. Others were sprawled in aisles or clustered near doors. Many were still clothed in tattered remains of outfits from various eras: Victorian dresses, 1940s suits, modern jeans and t-shirts, and stranger garments I couldn't place. But it was when I looked closer that true horror set in. These weren't ordinary human remains. Some had extra limbs jutting from their torsos. Others had elongated skulls or features that seemed to blur the line between human and something else. Each skeleton, regardless of its bizarre features, was oriented in the same direction, as if they had all been looking at something when they died. My mind reeled, struggling to process what I was seeing. Was this some kind of mass grave? An archaeological site of impossible proportions? Or something far stranger and more terrifying? Before I could even begin to formulate answers, I heard it. A low rumble, so deep I felt it in my bones before I consciously registered the sound. It grew louder by the second, and the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. Then I saw it, a light in the distance, growing brighter and larger with alarming speed. It was a train, but like no train I'd ever seen before. It was massive, easily twice the size of our largest underground carriages. The metal of its body seemed to shift and ripple, reflecting light in impossible ways. And it was heading straight for me, barreling down non-existent tracks with unstoppable force. Panic seized me. I ran, my heart pounding in my ears, drowning out the deafening roar of the approaching train. I didn't look back, didn't dare to waste a single second. I could feel the rush of air behind me, the vibrations growing stronger with each passing moment. I reached the crack in the wall, squeezing through with desperate strength. Just as I tumbled back into the familiar tunnel, I felt a tremendous force behind me. The otherworldly train roared past, the power of its passage sealing the crack and erasing any evidence of the cavern beyond. For several minutes, I lay there on the cold tunnel floor, gasping for breath, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. When I finally gathered myself enough to stand, I found no trace of the opening I'd just come through. The wall was solid, unbroken, as if the crack had never existed. In the days that followed, I tried to report what I'd seen. I told my supervisors, filed reports, even reached out to archaeologists and historians. But no one believed me. They said the tunnel was secure, that there was no evidence of any cavern or mysterious trains. Some suggested I'd been overworked. Others hinted at more serious mental health concerns. I've been on administrative leave for the past 3 months, undergoing psychiatric evaluation and mandatory counseling. They say I had some kind of breakdown, that the stress of the job finally got to me. But I know what I saw. It was real as the ground beneath our feet and the trains that rattle through London's veins every day. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that otherworldly rumble, feel the phantom vibrations of that impossible train. I lie awake, wondering about the cavern and its strange inhabitants. Where did those trains come from? Where were they going? And what power could have created such a place, hidden for who knows how long beneath one of the busiest cities in the world? I don't have answers, only questions that haunt my every waking moment. But I do know this: there are things in this world, or perhaps beyond it, that defy explanation. Forces and realities that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding, separated from our everyday lives by the thinnest of barriers. So, if you find yourself in the London Underground, or any subterranean space, and you hear a sound that doesn't quite fit, or feel a vibration that seems to come from somewhere deeper than it should, don't investigate. Some secrets are better left buried deep underground, hidden in the darkness where they can't shatter the comforting illusions of our orderly world. As for me, I don't think I'll ever see that cavern again, but I'll always wonder about it, always listen for that telltale rumble, and a part of me will always be there, lost in that impossible train graveyard, waiting for the next otherworldly engine to come roaring through the darkness.
As a quantum physicist specializing in the study of parallel universes, I've always operated on the fringes of scientific understanding. My work is complex, often bordering on the philosophical, and mostly theoretical. Or at least, it was theoretical until a fateful train journey changed everything I thought I knew about the nature of reality. It was a crisp autumn evening when I boarded the late-night express train. bound for a conference where I was scheduled to present my latest research. The car was nearly empty, just a handful of other passengers scattered throughout, each lost in their own world. I settled into my seat, pulled out my laptop, and began going over my presentation one last time. As the train sped through the darkening countryside, I found myself pondering the implications of my work. The multiverse theory suggests that an infinite number of parallel universes exist alongside our own, each one a slight variation on reality. It's a concept that has fascinated me for years, driving my research and shaping my understanding of the cosmos. Little did I know that in a matter of moments, my theoretical musings would be put to the ultimate test. The train entered a tunnel, plunging us into darkness. But this wasn't the usual brief blackout of a standard tunnel passage. This was an absolute, all-encompassing void that seemed to swallow everything: light, sound, even the very sensation of existence. The train shuddered violently, and I felt a sensation I can only describe as reality itself shifting around me, like the fabric of the universe was being torn apart and rewoven. When the lights flickered back to life, I was still on the train, but everything was off. The colors seemed wrong, too vivid, and yet somehow muted at the same time, as if I was looking at the world through a filter that enhanced and dulled everything simultaneously. I glanced around, my scientific mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The other passengers hadn't seemed to notice anything amiss, but they looked different. Subtle changes in their features, their clothes, the way they held themselves. It was as if someone had taken a familiar painting and altered it ever so slightly, everything recognizable, yet undeniably changed. Heart racing, I turned to the window, and what I saw made my jaw drop. The landscape outside was alien, utterly foreign to anything I'd ever encountered on Earth. Trees with blue leaves swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel. Rock formations defied gravity, twisting and spiraling in impossible shapes. And hanging in a purple sky were two moons, one silver, one gold, casting an eerie light over the strange terrain. In that moment, the reality of what had happened hit me with the force of a speeding locomotive. The train had somehow crossed the barrier between universes, transporting us into a parallel reality. All my years of study, all my theories and calculations, suddenly paled in comparison to the mind-bending truth I was experiencing firsthand. Before I could fully process this earth-shattering revelation, we entered another tunnel. The same impenetrable darkness enveloped us, the same violent shuddering rattled through the train. When we emerged, everything had changed again. This time, the other passengers were gone, replaced by beings that looked almost human, but not quite. Their skin had a faint blue tinge, their eyes were slightly too large, their movements too fluid to be natural. They paid no attention to me, as if I was invisible, a ghost from another reality, perhaps. This pattern continued for what felt like hours, though time seemed to have lost all meaning. Each tunnel took us to a new reality, each emergence revealing a world both familiar and utterly alien. Some universes were similar to our own, with only minor differences, a world where the sky was green, or where people communicated solely through telepathy. Others were so foreign, so incomprehensible, that my mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. I lost count of how many universes we passed through. In one, the train itself was made of living flesh, pulsing and breathing beneath us as we hurtled through a landscape of organic machinery. In another, we were deep underwater, fish-like creatures with bioluminescent patterns swimming past the windows, peering in at us with curiosity. There were worlds of pure energy, where physical form seemed to be a foreign concept. Realities where the laws of physics as we know them simply didn't apply, where cause followed effect and time flowed backwards. I saw versions of Earth where history had taken radically different turns, a world where the Roman Empire never fell, another where humanity had evolved from feline ancestors rather than primates. With each transition, each new reality, I felt my understanding of the universe, of the multiverse, expanding. Every theory I'd ever developed, every paper I'd ever written, seemed laughably simplistic in the face of the infinite complexity I was witnessing. I was experiencing firsthand the truth that countless philosophers and scientists had only dreamed of: the existence of parallel universes, each one a unique variation on reality. Just when I thought I was losing my grip on sanity, when the constant shifts and mind-bending sights threatened to overwhelm me completely, we entered one final tunnel. The darkness lasted longer this time, the shuddering more intense than ever before. I held my breath, wondering what impossible world we would emerge into next. When the darkness finally lifted, I found myself back in the original train car, surrounded by the same ordinary passengers I'd started the journey with. Everything looked normal, the same colors, the same physics, the same single moon hanging in a starry sky outside the window. We pulled into the station as if nothing had happened, passengers gathering their belongings and disembarking with casual indifference. To everyone else, it had been a normal journey, a simple late-night train ride. But I knew the truth. I had glimpsed the infinite, had traveled through the multiverse on an impossible quantum express. Needless to say, I never made it to the conference. How could I stand in front of my peers and present theories about parallel universes when I had just experienced the mind-shattering reality of them firsthand? Instead, I've dedicated myself to understanding what happened that night. Was it a unique phenomenon, a cosmic fluke never to be repeated? Or does every train journey, every tunnel, carry the potential to slip between realities? I've ridden that same train dozens of times since, hoping to repeat the experience, to gather data, to prove to myself and the world that what I experienced was real. So far, it hasn't happened again, at least, not to the same degree. But sometimes, just as we're entering a tunnel, I feel a slight shudder, see a flicker of something impossible out of the corner of my eye. A glimpse of blue leaves, perhaps, or the faint outline of a second moon. These moments, brief as they are, serve as a reminder that the universe, or rather, the multiverse, is far stranger and more wondrous than we can imagine. They drive me to continue my research, to push the boundaries of our understanding even further. So the next time you're on a train and it enters a tunnel, pay attention. Look closely at your fellow passengers, at the world outside your window. You might just find yourself on an express ride to another universe. And remember, not all tickets can return you to where you started. Some journeys change us forever, opening our eyes to realities we never dreamed existed. As for me, I'll keep riding the rails, keep searching for that elusive gateway between worlds. Because now that I've seen the truth of the multiverse, I can never go back to a simple, single reality worldview. The Quantum Express awaits, and somewhere out there, across the infinite expanse of parallel universes, it's still hurtling through the night, carrying passengers to wonders beyond imagination.
And there you have it, folks. 4 chilling tales of terror on the tracks. From ghostly passengers to time slips, underground horrors to quantum leaps, these stories show that train travel can be far more dangerous, and far stranger, than we ever imagined. I want to thank our brave storytellers for sharing their experiences with us. Remember, while these tales may seem far-fetched, the people who lived them swear they're true. So the next time you board a train, keep your wits about you. You never know where the journey might take you, or what might be riding along with you. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. And hey, why not share your own creepy train experiences in the comments below? Who knows, you might end up featured in our next video. Until next time, this is Sinister Media, reminding you to enjoy the ride. But always keep one eye on the shadows. Safe travels, and sweet dreams. If you can still sleep.